It's our mega auction strategy tips and tricks episode. From the nuts and bolts of preparation to the nomination process, bidding, and everything in between. And we have expert Steve Gardner of USA Today, organizer of the labor auctions, to help us navigate through all of these topics. One of our most highly requested shows of the season, an all-strategy episode, your Beat the Shift auction podcast, is next. Welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always is Ruvain Guy. How are you, Ruvain?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Pitchers and catchers have already reported. Baseball is right underway. Can't wait. I'm even playing a pickup softball game on Sunday, I think. We're going to try it out. So, yeah, I'm excited.
I think it's a little too early for that. We're not in Florida. We're not in Arizona. It's a little, it was beautiful the last couple of days, but it's supposed to get chilly again. It's not spring yet.
Well, if the temperature's over 50, I'll take it. So, what the heck? Maybe I'll pitch about 2-3 innings just to get started. Got to start somewhere, you know.
That's
so,
true.
There
That's
you go.
true.
Well, we've got a fantastic show today. We're going to do our auction strategy episode. A lot of you guys have asked for this, rely on this, so we're going to talk all things auction strategy. So hopefully you will be prepared for your upcoming one. If you haven't tried an auction yet, you definitely should. And to help us with that, we've got USA Today's Steve Gardner. How you doing, Steve? Welcome.
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this. It's a great opportunity to kind of get the ball rolling in terms of getting ready for auctions. And I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and the labor auctions are going to be in just a little bit over 2 weeks from now in sunny Florida. I plan to be there, and it's going to be a great weekend. Looking forward to that, Steve.
It's amazing. It's already at hand. We've got the lineups all set, and I can't wait. Labor is one of the best weekends of the year, and we have such a great group, and it's going to be, not only the labor auctions, but we also have Baseball HQ's First Pitch Florida conference that's going on. So much info and strategy and everything to soak up in one weekend. It should be outstanding.
And they're one of the first auctions of the year, so they actually set the tone for the rest of the auctions throughout the year.
Indeed, and I think that was really kind of one of the founding principles of labor is went back in 1994 to just set the bar, put those values out there, and so that you can look at that if you're in an auction league and kind of see where your league might go with some of the values that the experts and industry folks have.
I definitely recommend checking out the values when it's done, and either come to Florida or you can also listen on SiriusXM Fantasy Radio. We'll be broadcasting the auctions live, so check that out in about 2 weekends. And let's talk about auction strategy. We've got a lot of questions. A lot of people sent in mailbag questions, and we'll weave them into the show as we talk about topics. But let's just start really, really simple, Steve, and throw it out to you. How do you prepare for an auction, and how does it differ from your preparation of a snake draft?
Well, I think both of them, I look at the players in their positions and who qualifies where and kind of get a sense of the player pool. But the great thing about the auction is that everybody's in play. It's been said many times before in a snake draft, if you know what your draft position is, there are a good chunk of players, very good players in the first couple rounds, you're going to have no shot at getting. And at least in an auction, you have the possibility. There's so many different strategy lines and ways that you can approach it that it makes it so much fun because you never know what's going to happen. You look at some of the early drafts and some of the NFBC drafts, you're going to see the same 5 guys get taken first for the most part. In an auction, that's out the window. You can play it any way you want, and I think that's what really has, those of us who've been doing this for a while, that's why we love auctions, because everyone has its own type of personality.
Ruvain, what's your general preparation for an auction, and how does that differ from snakes?
Basically, for snake drafts, you know what the ADP is going to be. You can look it up. You can see where everyone's usually going. But just like Steve said, in an auction, everyone's on the table. Everyone's available to you. You can make a better plan. You can have an idea of who you want to get up and how it fits into that big puzzle of your whole roster. You have to make a budget for each position. You have to know how much you want to spend for each position. You have to know where you can find what we're going to talk about later, probably the hot spots where you want to jump in, where you want to attack the draft, where you want to be more aggressive. Because when it comes to a snake draft, if you're on the corner, if you're on the turn or anything like that, you have to be more aggressive. In an auction, you can be aggressive too, but it's a different type of aggression. It can change the way you do things in an auction. You can intimidate people, especially if it's a live auction. You can actually intimidate some people the way you bid on players. So there's certain ways that an auction draft is a lot different than a snake draft, and I actually prefer the auction because it gives you more control over your general team and how you want your team to look. Because listen, you're drafting a team now in February, March, whenever it is. You're going to be with the bulk of those players for the next 6 months. You get to pick who you want to be on your team for the next 6 months.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with everything so far. And, to add to that, in a snake draft, you have to buy one first rounder. You have to buy a second rounder, one third rounder, one fourth rounder. Don't have to do that in an auction. You can have 3 first rounders if you so choose. You can have 0 first rounders. You can do a lot of things. It's more flexible. So how does the preparation work? Well, in general, my preparation is calculate my values of players, estimate what the market's paying for them. You can find who's undervalued, and it's not just any particular players. We like to group pockets of players like hotspots, as we call them. If you have a number of players in a certain region of the same position, or same statistic works too, group them together. If there's 4 first basemen that have the same value and are a bargain according to the market, well, I'm indifferent to getting any one of them, but I have a better chance of getting someone in there undervalued. If you say, I really, really want Vinny Pasquantino, well, if you have another guy who loves Vinny Pasquantino, you're not going to get it. But if you have, is it Pasquantino and Nate Lowe and a whole bunch of players, you'll be more likely to get that. And then I put the plan together. For auction, the plan is look at the dollar points. For snake, it's a little bit different because you have to deal with some roster construction. I basically work more backwards in a snake, where I'm looking at, okay, I can get these players in the 9th round, these players in the 12th, so that means my first and second round choices will have to be X. Don't have to do that in the auction. I just look for all the combinations up high and up low that I think are hotspots all over the place. We have a question from Ryan who asks, and I'll change the question a little bit, but how do you tackle position scarcity in an auction versus snake? Are you more willing to punt a position in an auction than you are in a snake? How do you answer that, Steve?
Well, I think yes and no. I mean, there are different ways to do it. I think it's one of the things is you can prepare maybe a little bit better for punting a position or attacking a particular position a little bit better in an auction because, at least for me, I have a spreadsheet and I have projected amounts that I want to spend for, not necessarily each particular roster spot, but for each group of positions, like first base, third base, corner, infield. I will group those 3 together and say I want to spend somewhere around $50 for those 3, something along those lines. So if I have a position that is scarce, maybe I want to budget a little bit more to that. And if, for instance, all those guys go maybe above what I'm willing to pay, then I can shift and say, okay, I don't want to go there. I can move this money to somewhere else and look at it this way. I think we also have to remember that not only is there position scarcity, there's also category scarcity. And we have to, as you were talking, when you're making a plan, you have to kind of figure out how you're going to attack all of those scarce areas and how they overlap so that you can develop a plan and be able to, divert from that if and when you need to.
Ruben, I'll ask you this question first. How does online auctions differ from in-person auctions? Any strategy differences or logistic differences for you?
Yeah, there are a lot, and this showed its face when during the COVID year when we didn't have many live auctions. A lot of them were online. It's not you don't get the same feel. You don't get the same camaraderie when you have a live auction. You have an interaction with the rest of the players. You have an interaction with the auctioneer. You have an interaction with everybody who are just following the entire auction. It's just a lot more fun. Number one. Number two, when it comes to a live auction, you can actually control the room a lot better than when you're doing it online. When you're online, you can make bids and you can try to push people around with their money. But when you're making bids in person, you can use different ways you bid. You can be louder, you can bid softer, you can wait to the end, and you can also see tells. It's like being in a poker. It's like playing online poker and poker in person. You can see if someone's going after someone. You can see if they have any tells, like they're going to say, "Oh, you know what? I see this guy's going to go for it. He's pushing. He's pushing." You can't really tell that when you're online because you don't have the same. There are nuances that you miss when you're online compared to being in person.
Yeah, you draft against Jeff Zimmerman, and you just stare at him, and you know when he's going to bid and when he's not going to bid. I have no idea what he's doing online. I can't really see through the computer, so that's a very, very big thing.
You know what I will say? Can I throw something in real quick? Is one of the things that I learned is that you can't wait till the last second when you're in an online auction because there's a chance that the computer may not take your bid. You could get a bid in, you think, and your internet connection messes with you and you don't get it in. That's one of those where certainly it's a lot easier when you're in person to be able to just sort of take your time and drag it out maybe till the last second, use a little psychological strategy. You definitely can't do that if you're doing an online auction.
100%. But of course, you can't complain about the computer glitching if you do an in-person auction, right?
Right.
Oh, that CBS software, it made us buy this guy, right? You can't complain about it. No, that's a very big difference. You notice. I'll actually say this. I think that working with a partner is far more important in an online auction. And I'll tell you why. Because when I'm doing an online auction, I'm looking at the screen for my player values and whatever my draft software is that I'm using. But I also have to look at the computer for what the biddings are going and who's up, right? It's two screens I got to look at. I don't have to do that when I'm in person. I hear what the bids are, and I say what the bids are. I don't have to click on a mouse. So it's easier to maneuver and far more important to have a partner in. Not that it's not important to have a partner. I enjoy having it as well. But in person, you at least can see and hear everything. Very hard to maintain, I think, or harder to maintain with a computer. What is the difference, Steve? Because you do a lot of mono leagues. How does your strategy change in general in an auction for AL, NL onlys versus mixed?
I'll tell you, I think the deeper the leagues, the more you have to be so familiar with the end game and the last, the last 1/3 or whatever fraction you want to talk about of the player pool. You have to know because those guys, a lot of times, those last few picks, those reserve picks, are the ones that can be huge values for you. A lot of leagues are won and lost in some of those end game guys. So I think just being so familiar as you can possibly be with those last few people that will be drafted is the biggest because you're not going to get as much on the free agent market during the season. I mean, you're much more locked into your team that you draft in an AL or NL only league from the start than you are with a mixed league where you can pick up guys. There's often players who are decent and will be valuable for you during the season you can pick up on the waiver wire. So the depth of the league is what makes it challenging and makes it really what makes it fun for us.
Yeah, and thanks to Red Garfield 6 for submitting this question. We'll talk about it later, but I think that the mono leagues also lend more towards the spread the risk versus stars and scrubs, and pretty much for the reason that you said, Steve, that the waiver wire is more barren. If you're doing stars and scrubs, that really facilitates more use of the waiver wire because your $1 players you might cycle more. But in a mono league, you want to spread the risk a little bit more. You want to also minimize dollar bids. You want to get $3 is like your final pick. I find that that's the better strategy in NL only. And also hitter pitcher split probably tilts a little bit more towards hitting. Now you mentioned Fab, and I'll go to you first, Ruvain. How does the way that you draft affect your in-season Fab usage? Like, is this and do you strategize about the difference between draft capital versus Fab capital? Are you planning everything all together before you strategize for your auction?
No, I don't think so. I think the way you manage your Fab budget is based on how you draft. When you draft, you'll know whether or not you have strengths and weaknesses in certain areas. If you know you're weak in power and need to get power, you're going to spend more money on power on the Fab. If you know you're weaker in pitching, you're going to spend more money on pitching. That's the best way to go about it. Or you can do it the reverse. If you have a trading league and you're in an auction league, then you can actually strengthen your position even more during the draft and know that, say, you know what, I'll spend my Fab and strengthen even more so I can trade during the course of the season. There are different ways to go about it, but I don't think you should really go into the draft thinking about how you're going to use your Fab, because you don't know how you're going to do it until you see how your roster is constructed. Once you see how your roster is constructed, then you can plan your Fab accordingly.
Do you agree with that, Steve?
Yeah, for the most part. I think one area where you can do that and plan your in-season Fab usage is with a closer. And, it's a lot more difficult these days to get more than one closer, to get saves if you don't pay for them. I think a lot of folks that are going to be drafting this year are going to have to make decisions about, do I spend up for the Edwin Diaz's and Josh Haders of the world, or do I just back off and not pay that high price? And I think that's one of the things that you can certainly address in Fab after the season starts. Once we see bullpens a little bit more settled, who's going to be the A closer versus the B closer in a committee? I think that's the one area where you can sort of strategize. Okay, if I'm not going to pay a whole lot for closers and saves, I'll go ahead and spend. Or, the reverse of that is true too. I don't want to spend all of my Fab during the season fishing for closers every week. I want to get somebody and just lock in that closer and be good with them, and I can spend my Fab on everything else. They're definitely both strategies are equally valid.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think closers are a big thing that you just need to know what your plan is. And hey, if it looks like you're gonna have to spend Fab, maybe you do something a little bit different for the rest of your roster during the auction. Just something to be aware of there.
And there will be saves on the waiver wire during the season. You can't guarantee that there will be power, will be stolen bases, wins that you can pick up. You know that there will be saves on the waiver wire.
Yeah, I mean that's something that you have to do for yourself, and you have to see which is cheaper to get, which is more bountiful. Your draft capital for some statistic, or your draft capital for some position versus your Fab capital. Right? It's an opportunity cost, and you have to really judge that for yourself going into every single auction and make yourself aware of, well, if I don't do this, I have to do this in Fab. So I think it is something that you do have to consider. Steve, how do you prepare yourself mentally for the auction before then? I know our buddy Ian Kahn goes into a room and meditates for a while. I don't do that. I just show up at an auction. I'm a pretty calm guy in general, so I just show up, and I've done this before. I go to the bathroom, take a drink, and that's it. Is there anything that you do before an auction?
Not particularly. I mean, I will know my spreadsheet in and out. It's nice to be able to have something where you know where everything is, how everything adds up. You've got the numbers where you can easily manipulate them, and as long as you feel, I feel like as long as you feel comfortable that you've done your homework, going into the auction, you should allow your mind to be free and go with whatever direction the auction goes in, and be prepared to change your plan if you need to. But in terms of preparing mentally, I feel like if I've done my homework, then everything will work out as well as it can once I get in that auction room.
Anything you do special, Ruven?
Relax, have fun, enjoy. This is the highlight of the season for a lot of people. Just like opening day is a highlight of the season for a lot of major league teams, so they're not going to have a chance. The draft and the auction is the highlight of a lot of leagues because everyone is still in it. You can take a deep breath, make sure you're well caffeinated, especially because I know we do a 9 a.m. auction. To do that, you have to be wide awake. You have to get a good night's sleep the night before if you're going to do that. Try not to stay out drinking too much, the night before, because I know some people have done that in our league before. So just relax. There's nothing to be scared of. Everyone's on the same playing field. Everyone has the same amount of money to start with. There's nothing to be worried about. Just go into it and feel confident that you know your stuff.
Reuven, you reminded me of something too. When we go to New York City for Tout Wars, one of the things that I absolutely love is when I am walking from wherever I'm staying to wherever the draft is, that early morning or midday walk just to clear your mind and maybe have some tunes on in the old earbuds, but that little 15 minutes or however long it takes, I think is a great way to just get prepared and get everything everything extraneous out of your mind and start thinking about your draft.
I like to go over and talk to the people, just like I would do before a poker game, and get them used to my voice, and sort of have me fade in the background of them subliminally. Um, I mean, I tell people I hypnotize people, but it's true. I mean, that's what you do in a poker room. If you want to get people to bet a certain way, you talk to them before. You get them comfortable with you. So I recommend talking to people. It also calms you down. You don't think about the draft for a little bit. You just chat with them, ask them about their day, or ask them about something extraneous. Maybe get them off their game. You never know. That's what I do. What should you do during the breaks between, in the middle of the auction? That's even more important. I mean, I generally, take the time. Obviously, go to the bathroom, of course, but I like to sum up where I am, reset, see what positions I need, see what value I have left, prioritize. To me, it's all about priority. Prioritize my nominations coming up. What do you do, Steve, during your breaks?
I generally don't look at other people's rosters that closely during the auction. I'm more focused on what I need to do. And at the break, that gives me an opportunity to see where everybody else is. And, I know where my team is. I kind of got an idea where my strengths and weaknesses are. I like to take that time to look at what everybody else is doing. Who's got the most money left? Who's got the most spots to fill? What positions, maybe possibly bidding wars breaking out over as we get back to everything else after the break is over. That's a time for me to maybe do a little bit more scouting, and then I can sort of say, okay, here's what I need to do going into this second portion of the draft or the second half of the draft. It's more of a scouting thing for me than a planning, really.
Yeah. Anything to add, Ruve?
Yes, you rebudget your money. If during an auction you have a certain amount of money, you're going to know at the break, you'll see how much money other teams have left. Who are they going to be going after? Are you going after the same players? Are there players out there who are going to go first and they're going to be a bidding war right away? Some people may be desperate after the break after looking at their own team, and they may want to go after that also. Who will have the hammer? Who do you think is going to have the hammer toward the end? All these things you can take out, you take a peek, and you know what? Speak to some of the players, or speak to some of the players there also, because they may give something away that they may not mean to, and you may be able to take an advantage with that.
Now, so you mentioned, Steve, scouting, and my question to you is: before your auction, do you scout the other players and see what they've possibly have done in the past or what they're thinking of? And to add to that, do other people's bidding and player tendencies affect the way that you would operate in the auction?
I'll tell you, I don't really scout people as you would scout players, on the field or anything like that, and see what their tendencies are. I sort of kind of absorb that, especially if you've been playing in a league for a long time. I think you kind of, innately know where people will push, where they'll pull back, that sort of thing. So I don't know that I make a conscious effort to do that, but when we get into, perhaps a bidding war over somebody, that's when some of that knowledge will kick in. But I think that's maybe not something I'm very good at. I know, in fact, one of the first pitch sessions in Florida, Ariel, you were talking about, basically putting out a scouting report about this person likes to jump bid and this person likes to wait on closers and things like that. I think that's really interesting. I don't know that I would be very successful trying to figure that out because a lot of the best players will kind of realize that and mix it up to throw you off your game sometimes.
I actually think they don't mix it up as much as they like to, or
They try to, but they can't.
Well, yeah, but like for example, I come to Labor a couple years ago, and we're playing against Ryan Hallam, and he's wearing a Paul Goldschmidt Cardinals uniform, and that tells me something about him, right? Or if I'm playing Tout Wars and I'm playing against Paul Sporer, I take a look at what he's done the past 2 years in terms of hitter-pitcher split, and it's crazy, like 85-15. So that tells me I don't have to watch out for Paul at all during the thing because he ain't bidding on pitchers, and he's just going to clobber the deck on me on hitters, so don't even try to bid when he bids, right? That tells you something. Or I know Frank Stamfel is going to be involved in a lot of the same areas that I am. I got to be careful for him. So maybe I have to, in the middle of the auction, watch his roster and see who he's filled up. Because he's going to be closer to where I'm going to bid than anybody else. I think knowing about the different players, really important, and planning. If you have a lot of people who go in a certain tier in pitching, I might try a different plan because I don't want to get price enforced on that certain tier. I'm not going to say it's a must to do the scouting, but I think it really helps give an edge in terms of who to look out for. Because to me, when you're doing an auction, it's about economics in the room, and to know what is going to be more valued and less valued and what you have to watch out for and what bucket is more important, that just gives you a leg up. Forget about the players; it gives you a leg up on the economics. So,
And also you have to speak to them before the draft and see what type of systems they're using. Are they using the same system you are? Are you going to be going after the same players? That's also very important to know because if you know that right away, that doesn't hurt. Also, it doesn't hurt just to look at the players. I mean, you'll have a list of the other players in your league with you. It doesn't hurt just to look in social media just for a minute. You can befriend them. Maybe you can create a relationship that can be lasting for a long time. But you can also see which players they are more high on, and that may give you a little hint and a little help during the course of the draft.
What's going to be funny is that when we get to NL Labor, we have 5 new players out of 12 in NL. And that's going to be really interesting when we get Frank, you mentioned, Jeff Zimmerman is coming in, DJ Short from NBC Sports is coming in, Jeff Pontus from Baseball America, and Ron Chandler. They're all new for this season in NL Labor. It's going to be fascinating to see how they blend in with the veterans.
oh yeah,
I can't wait for that.
Yeah, I mean, Derek Hardy's going to use his bat system. Ray Murphy's going to use Baseball HQ. Knowing what they're using sort of helps. Of course, that also hurts me personally. With people know I'm using ATC, right? But knowing that information really does help you. Going to the heart of things. When you're in an auction, you have to bid an amount, right? There's what you value a player at and what a strike price is. What you're willing to pay for a player. How do you come up with that, Steve? Because that, to me, is the crux of coming to an auction, right?
Nobody's ever asked me about how I get my values for labor before. But I'm going to tell you, and you may kind of laugh at me. I basically take what happened last year and all of the values of all of the players at all of the positions, and basically strip out the names and put names back in for this year's player pool, and I fill out my sheet until it comes to the end of where the dollar value, the $1 players are, and that's where I start. And basically because it seems like every year in labor people will have a certain amount that they will go to. They won't really go beyond that. And so I found that that's the easiest way for me, especially, for people who are in the same league over and over. That's not a bad way to start and save time. And then what you can do is then tweak those to where, if there's a greater concentration of elite second basemen this year, you can massage the numbers. But either way, no matter what you do, you still have, one total that you have, what is it, 3160 or, whatever the total is for all the 12 teams times 260, 3120. It always has to add up to that much money is available. And so that's where I start, and that's how I prepare for labor.
All right, so basically you take your rankings and you take last year's values top to bottom and you sort of match them.
Pretty much, yeah.
Right, yes. Oh, 100%. I mean, when I construct market values, that's what I do. I take the ADP and I just match it to whatever was done last year. If you have last year's auction, I mean, that's the best. If not, you can come up with some formulas to approximate it. But yeah, if you have last year's prices, then that's the best starting point. I mean, for me, I use an auction calculator type thing on my own values. I come up with the market values and I look at the two. I also talk that I risk adjust prices, as I think that players, some are more risky, less risky, and their price has to be adjusted. I mean, to me, in terms of strike prices, in early on, you want to strike no greater than roughly what the player is worth, maybe $1 or so more. Later on, your strike price has got to be a discount. In the middle, you need $2 off. At the very end, you need $6 off. Strike price follows a curve, I think.
Yes, if you don't do that, exactly what you said, because we've been doing this for years together. If you don't do that, you're gonna be left with money left over, and you're gonna be if you don't strike early, like you said, and pay a little bit more for the top values just because you have the money, then you may end up paying or overpaying for the middle of the pack or the lower of the pack just because you have the money and just because you need to get rid of it, because otherwise you're going to end up with leftover money at the end of the draft, and that doesn't go toward your fab or anything. So there's no point in having leftover money. So if you don't go after those top few guys, yes, you could be conservative. Yes, you don't want to go over a certain value, but if you're too strict with it, you're going to have leftover money.
Yeah, Robert Ote asks a question: How much will you overbid to get a player you want? And my answer is nothing, unless there is a market premium. So if all the top starters are going $3 over what I thought they might, I'm okay paying $1 over, because I'd rather pay $1 over than $3 over. I'll make up that dollar on the back end, but I don't want to, veer too far. I certainly won't go, $7 over a player, because you're just throwing money out. You never make up the $7 on the bottom. But in general, I won't overbid other than a market correction. Is that true for you, Steve, or are you willing to overbid by a couple to get your guy?
Well, the one exception to that is, at least for my experience, if you're in a keeper league and there's keeper league inflation that requires you to do that, and you have a need and you have to, pay extra to fill that particular slot. I think we're talking mostly throughout the conversation tonight about redraft leagues where everybody's starting from scratch. I just had a keeper league draft a couple of weeks ago and had a similar situation to where there were basically two catchers that were available at the top of the food chain in Salvador Perez and Adley Rutschman. And I was targeting Rutschman. He's the guy that I wanted because this is a keeper league. And I was praying that nobody would put out Salvador Perez first, because I wanted to have Rutschman go first and have all those other people. And maybe we can talk a little bit more about the auction dynamics and everything. But if you have a guy that you like, you want him to go out first when there's another guy that is comparable, so that people will kind of say, oh, well, if I don't get this guy, then I can go, there's always somebody else out there. This other guy is out there. I can wait for that guy. So, yeah, and I ended up overpaying, I think, like $8 over what I thought I should for Rutschman. But for me, it was worth it. And I had, good values in the keeper ranks, and I would try and make it up later, as you said. You can do that sometimes and get better values later, especially if people are spending really really early and spending a lot early, to just wait until things cool down.
Exactly. It depends on how hot the room is. If the room is hot and your guy's going out there, it's either you go after him and you be really aggressive, or you just let him pass and hopefully you have a plan B.
Exactly.
We'll talk later about more about nominations, but yeah, in general, you're right that if there's two guys and you really want a certain guy, you want to get that nomination out, because if the other guy comes out first, you don't know whether to bid on him or not because you wanted the other guy. So it is really, really important to get there. Now, you did mention the keeper inflation, and we had a question about that from Bill, who's asking exactly what you're saying. Is it okay to pay over? So keeper inflation is a real thing. And the definition of inflation is you have more money and less value. And that's true. I mean, if you have $260 to get 260 players, there's no inflation. But in a keeper league where people are kept under value, you've got less value to get and more money to get. So all the numbers are going to be multiplied by 10%, on top. So that's a real thing. To me, that should really be baked into the price on top of everything. Now, we're talking about hot and cold auctions, and I just do want to get this concept out. And one of the things that I really look for in the very beginning of the auction is how hot or cold an auction is. And if I find that the prices are really close to my values, I call that a cold auction. To me, that's the time to pounce and be aggressive early on top. In a hot auction where the top players are going $7, $8, $9, forget about it, I'm not talking about keepers, regular redraft, $7, $8, $9 on top. I call that a hot auction. I want to stay away. I don't feel the need to pay that market premium because that is throwing out money, and you'll never get it back at the bottom. You'll never get a $7 bargain somewhere to make up just for that one. I'm okay with passing on all the top players, and I'll take guys in the third, fourth, fifth round to start my draft. I don't need to pay that. That's one of the first things I do is I take the temperature of the auction and decide. The hotter it is, the more I stay away up top. The colder it is, the more aggressive. The hard part comes when it's somewhere in the middle, and you got to pick one to do. Anything to add to that, Ruvain?
Yeah, I think you have to really be careful with that because you really want some of those players. Some of those guys, they're so tantalizing, but then you get into a bidding war, and this is where I wanted to disagree with you earlier when you said it's better to have a partner online. I think it's better to have a partner when you're in person to hold you back from getting into those bidding wars. You can
What
always
do you
say to
say,
yourself.
Ruvain?
You can always say, "What's that extra dollar? What's that extra dollar?" But that extra dollar turns out to be $6 or $7 or $8, and it screws up the rest of your plan for the rest of the thing. If you have someone holding you back, saying, "You know what? Make sure maybe we don't need to go after this. Maybe that extra dollar is not worth it." That helps because you want to wait till the room is cold. Usually the room is cold after like the first 3-4 rounds. Usually things calm down. Last couple of years though, I've noticed that the room stayed hot, and sometimes you have to overpay even a little bit, but you still should wait a little bit till things calm down.
Folks, if you want that voice and you don't have a partner there, just have Ruvain in the back of your head saying, patience,
Yeah.
patience,
Yeah, I do that every draft with you. I say just wait, hold on, just wait.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, we're talking about the temperature, hot and cold. In general, there's going to be parts in the auction that are hot and parts of the auction that are cold. Remember, it's a zero-sum game. If you did your values correctly, they all add up to the 3120 number or whatever, your number is for your league. And there's going to be a section where it's cold. That's when where there's bargains, right? You want to play in the area where there's bargains. You don't want to play in the area where there's not bargains. If the temperature is hot earlier, it's going to be colder later, and vice versa. So the whole thing is timing when to come in. That to me is the story. Anything to add, Steve?
Well, I will say that, yeah, when I have my spreadsheet set up and I have all the values and they add up to 3120, and I'm able to see, a running total of what, when I put the new prices in, how far above 3120 or below the total value is, of the entire board. That's how I judge whether it's hot or whether it's running at a cooler temperature. And I'll say one other thing that you guys were talking about. You don't necessarily want to jump in when everybody else is overpaying by $7 for players early. But if the if the market and the auction is running hot, and somebody, a star player kind of slows down right about where your bid values are, it's not a bad time to go in and get that player for value, or for par, when things are going hot, because generally that's going to be, one of your more productive players. So I wouldn't say to stay away completely, but if there's somebody that maybe not that's not going for as much as maybe they should, where everybody else is going, that you could possibly jump in and get somebody for maybe $1 more or $2 more than what you budgeted.
Oh, 100%. That is the best when that happens. When everybody's going $7 over and you're getting a guy at par, oh my God, that's a slam dunk. 100%. I totally agree on that. Want to come to this topic? I got 2 questions in. Trevor asks, draft budget allocation, how much do you like to spend on hitting versus pitching? And Jeremy asks the same thing. He also suggests that he says he usually uses 70-30, but should he use a little bit more tilted towards pitching? So, the question is, what do you do, and in terms of hitter versus pitcher, for yourself, Steve?
I start with 70-30, and what I tend to do is I find a lot of times people go a little bit more on hitting, and I'm more interested in some of the pitchers that turn up. I feel like I get a little bit better values on pitchers, so I'm willing to maybe spend a little bit more than 30%, maybe closer to 35% on pitching. But when I'm starting, and putting everything and getting ready, I generally set it so that it's 70-30 and then adjust from there depending on how the room is going.
I think there's a couple things at play here. One is, what should you optically calculate your values to on your draft sheets if you're calculating auction values? And then the question is, what should you actually buy, right? You don't necessarily have to buy the same distribution that's on the spreadsheet, right? I think that to answer the question of what you should have on your sheets, optically, you should match whatever the room is. If your league is 65-35, you should have that as best you can on there. If your league is in a mono league and it's more 70-30, that's what you should do. If you're playing the NFBC and it's more 62-38, you should have your values do that. And the reason you should is because you want to be indifferent to bargains from a pitcher or hitter. If you're setting your hitting percent much more than what the league is doing, the hitters are going to look like all bargains for you, and the pitchers are going to look terrible. Or if you did the reverse, if you had much more towards pitching, the pitching will look like bargains to you, and the hitting will look like overpays. You don't want that because you have to get both hitters and pitchers. So optically on your sheet, you want to balance that as best as you can to what the league is doing. And it's a guess, of course, but, make a good educated guess. As far as what you should actually get, 2 things I'll say is, 1, if you happen to be better at pitching than hitting, maybe tilt your values a little bit more or get your distribution a little bit more towards the hitting because, well, you're better at the pitching, so maybe you need a little bit more help on the hitting. So that's one adjustment. The other thing I'd say is, looking at research this year, the Birchwood brothers put together some research on Fangraphs a couple weeks ago. They saw that the teams that did better in the NFBC overall were teams that budgeted much more to pitching as a percent of their allocation than the hitting. Right? They, instead of going 65-35, they actually went closer to 60-40. So I would say in deeper leagues, in overall contests, you want to be a little bit more pitching these days. With pitching on the waiver wire being much crappier this year, I think that you should actually have your plan closer to 60-40. Optically, do what the room does, but have your plan a little bit more that way.
Especially this year. This year, if you look at the bottom of the player pool, the pitchers, you start looking at those names and you're thinking, wait, I don't want any of these people on my roster. They're just going to hurt me. You'd want to spend more money on pitching. So it makes more sense to try to tilt it a little more toward pitching. The hitting bargains you'll get because the hitters, actually, if you look at the bottom of the player pool and the hitters, you can get, there are more bargains to be had later on in the hitting pool. And you'd probably be more comfortable with some of those hitters in later on as opposed to the pitchers later on. Because just think about it. If you're not comfortable with the pitchers at the bottom of the player pool and you have to get those pitchers during the draft, just think of what you have to go through fab later in the season to try to replace those guys.
Yeah, and by the way, this says nothing about the distribution of players within the pitching or within the hitting. We're just talking about the total amount. You might want to do more stars and scrubs or not. And while we're talking about stars and scrubs versus spread the risk, I got a question from Yukon, and he asks, which do you prefer? What's your answer, Steve? What do you do? What do you tend to do, I should say?
I'm more of a spread the risk kind of person. I like the ability to pivot, to change strategies, and if you have a nice even base, you're able to do that much easier than if you have concentrated in your categories in a smaller subset of star players. So I'm a firm spread the risk kind of guy, and when I've tried to do stars and scrubs, even on purpose, a lot of times it seems like it has not worked out well for me. So I do what you know, do what you're good at, and I think for me it's spreading the risk.
And especially mono leagues, you need to tilt more to that. Ruvain, I know that you're closer to spread the risk. Is that right?
100%, but there's a big but here. Last year in our NFBC auction, we wanted to go middle. We wanted to spread the risk. That was the idea. But we took a temperature of the room, and it seemed like 3-4 other people were doing the exact same thing. So if that happens, that'll clean out all the bargains. There are not going to be that many bargains in the middle, and you may have to start tilting a little bit towards stars and scrubs. And that's what we did a little bit, and it didn't actually work out. We tried to pivot a little bit during the middle of the draft. It didn't work out. So I think spreading the risk is still the way to go, even if you have to fight and even if you have to pay for those guys.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to do more spread the risk, but I think you should always be prepared to do either. You should have a plan for getting what would happen if I bought a higher valued player. What would happen if I bought two higher valued players? You should be prepared to play either way. Tendencies, I think the values come more by spread the risk, which is why I gravitate towards that. But different things happen. I know in Labor when I played, I think I gravitate a little bit more towards stars and scrubs. I had Jeff Zimmerman in a bunch of those, and he sops up some more in the middle, so I went a little bit more. In Tout Wars, I do completely spread, or I should say I did completely spread the risk. Let's talk some in-draft adjustments. Obviously, you're going through your auction, and sometimes things go the right way or what you've planned for. Sometimes it doesn't. Hopefully it goes more the way that you wanted than not. But what are some adjustments that you do, Steve, or you find yourself doing during auctions?
Well, I like to keep a running total of where I stand in terms of the category stats. So that requires having a set of projections. And once you purchase a player, you roster a player, you kind of drop those stats into your master sheet. So I'm constantly looking at where I am, how many steals I need to get where I want to be, how many saves I need, how much power I have, and basically in the middle of the draft, I'm always kind of recalibrating and recalculating to see where I'm lagging and where I may have a little bit of a surplus. So those are the adjustments that I make, and obviously you want to keep tabs on if you think a particular position is deep or thin, where those remaining players are, how many of them are there, and how much of a priority you need to make of that to get your roster to fill out. So it's a constant state of adjustment. Mostly, like I said earlier, I'm looking at what my roster is and what other players are available, more so than I'm looking at the builds that other people are making on their own.
Ruben, what are you doing in the middle of auctions to adjust?
Managing the money, making sure the moving the money around, because if you overpay for a hitter, you have to sometimes take some money out of the hitting and move it to pitching, or vice versa. You got to do something like that. So I'm always making sure the money is allocated correctly for hitting and pitching, because I think you need to have that. You have to hit that certain amount of value for each pitching and hitting. So if you go over in one spot, if you overpay for a hitter, that means that you're going to be losing money, maybe hypothetically in pitching, just because you have to take the money out of pitching to go into hitting. So you have to really manage what's going on and watch what other teams are doing and how they're spending their money and try to manage your money accordingly. I know that's what we do as a team. I'm the one managing the money and you're managing the stats.
Yeah, I'm looking more at the players and what they're worth. I mean, theoretically, player prices should change dynamically during the auction. My own draft software does that. I bet, and to just visualize the concept, suppose you've just drafted John Birdie. Hey, Steve, you just drafted John Birdie in our mock auction we did, right? Suppose you've got Birdie and you've got Adalberto Mondesi that you thought you had a good price. What should the value of another stolen base player be? What should Tommy Edmonds value to you? It should be not as appealing to buy him, being that you've just bought yourself 60 steals or whatever you've done. So theoretically, that player should be worth less to you, and a power player should be worth more. So theoretically, you should be adjusting based on your categorical needs and purchases so far, right? Not easier said than done, but just realize that is there. And I look for market premiums and see, what positions are cheaper and more expensive and adjust pricing and expectations there. Talking about draft inflation, a lot of people have asked about that in the mailbag. How do you handle draft inflation, Steve? And I got to tell you that I don't really believe it's there, or at least I don't account for it. I just know, based on what I was talking about earlier with taking the temperatures, that there's ebbs and flows, there's hot parts and cold parts. And if players are hot earlier, so they're inflated, and so it'll be deflating, at the end. I just have a gut feel of myself, and I've done so many of these that I know I don't track in-draft inflation. And really, a value is a value. It's a zero-sum game. Different than keeper inflation, because that's a real thing. But do you handle or track that at all?
No, when I think of in-draft inflation, I think of the temperature of the room. Those to me are pretty much synonymous. And so, I've got my totals of what's been spent so far and the projections of, how that affects the total amount of money that's available. So that's what I look at. And, when the number goes way above what it should be, then it seems to me most of the time that's the time to back off and wait for it to cool down.
We're talking with Steve Gardner here at our auction strategy podcast extravaganza, just pure strategy today, and hope you guys are all enjoying this. And we're going to talk about nomination strategies. And a lot of people poo-poo this, and they say, yeah, just throw somebody out there, or put some guy out early who we don't like, or whatever. I think that nomination is very, very important to do, and it really enables you to control the auction a certain way, to get information out, and so on and so forth. To me, you have a lot of different pressures, nomination pressures during the auction. Do you need an information about a player? Just as Steve was saying earlier, there's two guys I like, one guy I like more. I want to get that guy out first because I don't want the other guy nominated, or my price will go up, right? If there's a guy that you really need to know about, who really fits your roster, that's a pressure to nominate them. There's also pressure of a player getting artificially inflated because of the economics of the room. We call it the economic box, where you have a player who's maybe, let's say he's a $10 player, and there's nobody in that category up until $5, just sitting there. Nobody remembered to nominate him. That guy's price is very high. So if you wanted that player, you have to nominate him before he gets to that economic box and artificially inflates the price because of the dynamics of the room. There's also pressures in terms of how much money you have. If you have a lot of money in the auction compared to everybody else, you might be overpaying for players. You don't want to get to that position, so you might want to nominate more players you want, as opposed to when you have just spent a lot of money and you're down low on funds, you probably don't want to nominate players that you want because you want to get money off the board, right? You want to be economically on par with everybody else in the room so that you have the same purchasing power as everybody else, right? So there's a lot of things at play there. And I think that it's very important to realize that in and of itself. So, Steve, anything to add to that? And what are you thinking of in the room when you're coming to your nomination? All right, Steve, you're the next guy to nominate. Who's up for bid, and how do you determine that?
Well, I would say roughly 3 out of every 4 players that I nominate, I probably am not going to get and don't have really much interest in, because I want to see what other people value these players at, and I want to see them spend on these players a lot of the times. So I'll throw out players that perhaps I'm not really high on, but everybody else may be. If I'm lower on somebody than consensus, those are the players I'll throw out because I know I'm not going to get them anyway, and I want to have that money off the table as soon as possible. So that said, the fourth one out of the group of 4 that I do have interest in, I think that keeps the rest of the room on their toes, so they know that I'm not just throwing out players that I have no intention of getting. And I'll use that to test, as you were saying, Ariel, to see where that particular player, if that's a dividing line between, these players that may deserve to go for a higher amount or these players deserve to go for a lower amount. For an example, throwing out, say, Felix Bautista, for instance. If he's one of the first closers, he's not certainly in the upper elite tier, but he's certainly not a guy that you wouldn't mind having as a closer. Very talented and all of that. Could have 30 saves this year. So just to get an idea what the market is like, because a lot of times I've found once a player has established a price, everybody sort of works in relation to what's already been established, and is there in stone. So if a player should be better than Felix Bautista, then they'll go above whatever he sold for, $16 or whatever. Then, there's that artificial line that don't want to cross, or they will cross to go for another player. It's just a way to kind of set some limits on things, and especially if you already have a closer or something like that, it's much more helpful as well.
Yeah, that's interesting advice there. Getting a feel for the market by doing that. I think for me, I'm a little bit more in the camp of you should be putting more nominations to player that you're interested in. Ruvain, I mean, you do it with me. I think we're a little bit closer the other way, right?
Yeah, we want to throw out a player in a group of, let's say we want a top pitcher. We'll throw out someone in the top group that we're comfortable with, that we know we have an idea what the price is going to be, and we throw it out there. We'll see what it is. If it doesn't go where we want, fine. There's still a whole bunch of other players in that group. It also depends when you're nominating, because you have to. When we go into a draft, both you and me, Ariel, we look at our draft and we actually plan out who we're going to nominate for the first 3-4 rounds. We want to know. We want to be able to control the room by our nominations. If you can, let's say one year we decided we're going to throw out all the speed guys. We want to put a premium on speeds. Let's say you wanted to, throw out a guy, you throw out a starting pitcher because you want to know how this tier of starting pitchers are going to go, or maybe you can get a guy cheaper on that tier. Then throw out a guy at the bottom part of the tier that you're comfortable with. Then that's perfectly fine. That's something you need to learn something. Don't just throw someone out just for the heck of getting money off the board, especially early on. Later on, it's different. Later on, you can throw out and just try to get off the highest ADP guy, the highest guy that you think is going to go for the most money to get more money off the board. But I think you have to have a plan of who you're going to nominate at least the first couple of rounds. So then that way, okay, so you know what? First couple of rounds, you may end up buying the guys that you want on those levels, but you at least have a basis. You'll know what's going on. You'll have what you want already. You'll have a base, and you can work from there.
Yeah, it's funny you said how you can control a room, and people are like, "Well, just one nomination. How do you control a room?" And it's funny, Steve and I was just before this doing a mock draft together, and I always notice. You ever notice there's runs, there's closer runs, there's catcher runs. Like somebody picks a catcher, and then 3 out of the next 5 picks are catchers. Right? We had that. That goes because people are mentally thinking. You put out a catcher. Oh, crap, I need to look at catchers. So they go to the list of catchers and say, who do I want? Yep, sounds about right. I need him now. Ding. That happens in auctions. When you throw out a catcher, a lot of times the next nomination is also going to be a catcher because they're thinking about catchers. You shift to closers, all of a sudden 4 out of the next 6 picks are closers. Happens a lot. And so you can control the tempo by just switching the category that you're nominating. If you think that, oh goodness, I need to get off this, I need them to nominate another category, switch it to an interesting category that people are going to think about, and all of a sudden people are going to nominate on and on and on. Very interesting point there. Should you nominate players from a position that you already have if you're trying to get money off the board? Question, and I think the answer is absolutely yes. You guys agree with that, right?
Do it all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Of course. You have you bought a high price first baseman. I got Freddie Freeman. You don't need Vlad. Of course, nominate Vlad for sure.
Or what you can do is if you have a top flight first baseman and you see that there are 1 or 2 first basemen up there that are still left, if you nominate someone below, you can actually create the economic box and make those 2 higher ones worth more, and that's how you can actually cause in-draft inflation. That's how you can actually, control the room.
Yeah, it's called the Swiss cheese nomination. If it's a category that you don't want, don't nominate the highest guy. Nominate the second or third highest guy. Because then the highest guy is going to go for even more than they should have. And you've just extracted another $3 from the room for nothing, right? That's really, really a good thing to do.
I never knew that was what it was called.
Well, that's because I made it up just now.
Oh, good. All right. Well, now it's our secret.
Yep, the Swiss cheese nomination.
And the podcast audience's secret.
Yeah.
Yes, just us know that. We've also talked in the past about the Joey Votto nomination, and that's because a couple years ago there was a player named Joey Votto who you might know, who went for like $1 in leagues, but our projections show that he was worth $8. Now, we didn't really want to get Joey Votto. I don't know. I'd rather have a different corner infielder, but the math guy in me says, I don't want to leave such a bargain out there, a $7 bargain. So what do? You nominate him earlier. And when you nominate a guy like that earlier in the auction, he won't go for 1, he'll go for 3 or 4. All right, so the guy's getting a $3 or $4 bargain. He's not getting a 7. You've just collapsed the return on investment that you didn't want anything to be a part of. And that's another good use of a nomination. Not too early, but much earlier than the guy would go. That's called the Joey Votto nomination. Let's talk about money management. Do you look, Steve, to pace yourself during the auction? Meaning, oh my goodness, I'm buying too many players, I got to slow down. Or, oh goodness, I don't have enough players, I got to speed up. Are you looking at that at all? Or maybe you're just, you've done this so many times, you just get a feel for everything?
I do, because a lot of times I feel like I'm overly aggressive early, and I will get more than 1 or 2 guys in the first couple of rounds and feel like I'm spending too much early and have to back off a little bit and kind of physically restrain myself from bidding too much for fear of not having any money for the middle and the end game. So yeah, I that's something that I have to constantly be aware of, because I like to see a value, a player that I like. If he's at my number, maybe $1 or so below, it's hard to resist jumping in and getting your feet wet and enjoying it yourself. So I do have to pace myself sometimes.
Ruvain, do you enjoy having the hammer at the end? Is that important to you, or doesn't matter?
I mean, it does help, especially if you think you're weak in one area. Like if you have the hammer and you're weak in pitching, then you can gobble up all the pitchers you need to before they really drop off, or vice versa. If you're weak in hitting, you can gobble up all those things, all those players as well. But the thing is, you don't need the hammer to win. If you follow your plan and you're able to stick to the plan, then you should be able to manage your money okay. You should be pacing yourself okay. And just like in poker, you can't be in every single hand. You have to wait. You have to wait. You have to wait, and sometimes the waiting will get you the hammer, but you don't need the hammer unless you're going after a certain player at the end of the draft. If you think that this player is going very late, you think he's going to be a great bargain, and you want to have that money for that one player, that's fine. But otherwise, I don't see a need for that.
So let's talk a little bit about bidding and what you should be bidding on players, because that's what most of the time that you're actually doing in the auction. So question is the frequency. Steve, how often should you bid on players, right? You're not going to bid on every single player, but should you bid on quite a few players, or should you wait, let the auction come to you, and only bid on a select players? What do you do?
No, I like to be involved in most of them, especially if the bidding is not going, quickly, and you want to kind of get the tempo up a little bit. I like to do that, and I will be in on most of the players. It seems like, or at least it feels like, I'm ready to bid on most of them. But yeah, it's a lot of times I'll just kind of fuel the process along, and then the people who are really interested are the ones that kind of take it away. But I don't like to see good value players sitting there, for $5 and $6. I will jump in if I feel like somebody's going to get an unexpected bargain.
I like to bid on like 80% of the players. I want people to hear my voice, because if you hear me bidding on every single player, you won't know or won't be conscious of who I really want and who I don't want, because I'm just bidding on everybody. I think that we're not as good at faking it, so you might as well disguise it with volume.
With self-restraint. With self-restraint. You can bid on every player, but don't do that if you have two catchers, a two-catcher league, and you're bidding on a third catcher, then you get stuck with a third catcher. So, yes, you can bid on everybody, but there has to be some self-restraint with it. It also changes things up. It masks what's going on. People don't know who you're really necessarily going after, and you may end up getting a bargain out of a player you weren't expecting, and sometimes it falls into your lap, and that can happen also.
Ruben, that catcher thing happened once,
Yes,
once.
and it happened, and we ended up with three catchers, and we ended up rostering them for quite a while, and we're not doing that again.
All right, that
Lesson
was a mistake,
learned, right?
Yeah. All right. So on to bidding. Should you price enforce? Tricky, because it might backfire. But theoretically, of course, you should price enforce if you know the next guy is gonna bid more and you don't want the guy. What's your take on that, Steve?
I do. And occasionally I will go a little bit too far and get stuck with a guy that maybe I wouldn't have bid as much on. But, part of the auction dynamic is you want to not only get your team the way that you want it, but you want to force other people out of their comfort zone. And that's one way to do it. And so for me, the times when I've been able to get people to go an extra $2 or an extra $4, I feel like it's been beneficial to me to make them work that much harder, so that it makes things a little bit easier for me. So yeah, I will price enforce, and occasionally I will get caught doing it.
Anything to add, Ruve?
Yes, price enforcing is not just on bidding, it's also on nominating. You can price enforce just like we mentioned before about nominating someone earlier. That price enforces that certain player, so that player doesn't go for a certain price. So that's doing it that way also. So it's not just the bidding, it's also how you nominate and how you play the whole game.
Yeah, I mean, if you know how to do it correctly, you should be price enforcing. Never price enforce a player that you can't afford, right, or will completely screw up your plan. But sure, if it's, all right, I guess I'll take that guy, sure, you should definitely give it a try. And it's poker. Look at the tells in the room. See when you know a guy is going to bid. I will say, though, that it's sometimes price enforcing is sort of makes me feel good. or not me particularly, but it makes you feel good in that, well, you weren't sure about a player. I'll bid up $1, and then the guy goes over. Well, thank God I bid then. It was the right decision, right? It could be a scenario where, oh, you feel good about yourself. Oh, the guy bid over. So yeah, it's psychologically and helpful to you at a certain level as well. Okay, next question. What should you use as a starting bid, Steve?
I vary them. Obviously, it doesn't make any sense to start Vlad Guerrero Jr. at $1. I generally, with elite players, because I want to see the auction move, I feel like if it's at a good pace that I'm comfortable with, that benefits me. So I'll start, the upper tier players at $10, at $15, at $12, something along those lines, and just get the pace going. The players in the middle, I'm not going to start that high, maybe at 2, maybe 3 or something like that. And then later on, obviously, you start at 1 and hope you get a bargain sometimes. And if you don't have anybody else bidding. But yeah, I think you vary it a little bit. And the more you can, keep from being predictable, I think the better it is.
I agree with the keep predicting, but I would say instead of varying it, I like making the same bid. $18, you'll just hear me hit the same number the entire auction on anybody over $25. $18. You just don't know if I'm in the guy or not. I'm not varying it at all, but I'm just throwing it out like that, so you can't know what I'm doing. Later in the auction, 4. Everything's gonna be 4. You just hear that monotonous tone of the same number. It helps with the hypnotization or whatever the noun form of the word is.
And I agree with that, except in the one instance when you want to try to freeze the room, and when you try to throw out that freeze bid, that's not that commonly done. It doesn't always work, but sometimes if you keep mesmerizing someone with the same bid over and over, you say 18, 18, 18, and all of a sudden you throw a guy out there 26, and the room is silent. That's when you know that those biddings, those nominations worked.
Yeah, the giving the same exact number helps if you want to do a freeze bid. And you do want to do a freeze bid very sparingly, once or twice in an auction. And having that monotonous number helps. 18, 18, all of a sudden, 26. People get confused. What? I was expecting an 18. And they don't have time to think, going once, going twice, and it's your player. That has worked in the past, for sure. Do you agree with that, Steve?
To some degree, I will say, not to give away any secrets, but if somebody bids 26, does a jump bid or something like that to try and freeze the room, in my experience, they're going to set a number that's maybe $2 below their max, generally, because they'll throw the bid out there, hope to get it at a $2 discount, and then if somebody should happen to bid them up, they'll bid one more time, and that's it. And so that's kind of what I watch for. If somebody makes a jump bid, are they willing to go one more? And if I'm willing to go beyond that, then I will engage with them, maybe jump bid myself. That's another, tactic you could use. If somebody goes to 26, you go to 28, are they going to go to 29 if 28 was their number? That's just another way to kind of, do the mental dance that you need to and keep the other folks off guard.
Yeah. It's funny with the +2 bids, like from 26 to 28. It's funny. I don't think they work all the time. They work like half the time. But I do say, though, that it's another one of those makes you feel better, right? If you say, well, 26, should I go to 27 or should I go to 28? Well, I'll just say 28. And if the guy goes 29, you think to yourself, well, thank God, I at least I jumped it that much and whatever. But if you win him at 28, then you say, oh, great, I jumped him and it worked. So it's a win-win situation, right? So makes you feel better.
And especially, let's say you have the bid of 26, and let's say you jump to 29. Very few people, unless they really know the player, they'll jump to 30 just because that number 30 means something, as opposed to still being in the 20s. You're getting a $30 player for a player maybe valued at 28 or 27.
So I actually disagree with that. I've actually done some research that the nines trick, bidding on the nines, actually does not work. But what works actually more is the zeros, like going to actually 30. People are less inclined to go from 30 to 31. Like, I've actually studied this, and it's not a big effect, but the effect is at the zeros, not at the nines, actually. But you're right. The concept's correct.
Just look back at at previous drafts.
Yeah.
You can see where did the bidding end. Did it, was it 30? Was it 29? Was it 31? How many times does it go to 31? Or 21. That'd be an interesting thing to look at.
Yeah, and I've done that. There's a lot fewer 11s than there are 10s, and you'll actually find that to be true. So yes, if you wanted to jump a bid, I would say go to the zeros if you want to win it. That's not just on the off chance that it works. It works a little bit more of the time than not. All right, last thing about the bidding is actually two more things. One is timing of bids, because you were talking earlier about the online. You don't want to wait till it goes going once, going twice, because it can be locked out. But what is the right time to place a bid on a player that you want, player you don't want? Like, do you wait very often, or do you go right away? How do you work that, Steve?
I generally will go if it's a prolonged bidding. If we're going 28, 29, 30, I will generally bid rapidly. And then, just to sort of indicate, yes, I'm serious here. This is a player that I am interested in, and I am serious, and make the other person, if they're going to price enforce, let them know, all right, go ahead. This is a showdown. Generally, I will do that. Other times, maybe if I'm not so sure, or if I'm trying to feel the other person out to see how serious they are, I'll wait toward the end of the going once, going twice. But generally, don't do that.
Moving? What are your thoughts?
First of all, online, different beast. Never wait to the very end because you can get screwed. You end up paying $2 extra for another player. So don't do that online. There's no point. If you have a number you want to get to, there's no reason why online, if you're doing an auction online, to just put the bid out there. You either got it or you don't got it. There's no reason to wait. But in person, it's a matter of how the room is going. If you see a lot of people getting into bidding wars, then you may want to be more aggressive and make the bid right away. But a lot of times, sometimes if you say that here the going once, going twice, and you bid it at the end, it can be a little bit deflating for that person who thought they were going to get for their player at that price. But if you see that you waited to the end and he bid right away, then bid a number right away right after that, because strategically the guy you're bidding against will say, you know what, this person really wants this player. Do I want to get into a bidding war with them?
That's where it's important to know who the person is in your room, in your league that you're bidding against, because different people take that differently. And the same tactic doesn't necessarily work, with everyone.
Yeah, totally. It definitely depends on the person. In general, I kind of like bidding quicker than later. And the reason is I know the values that I think of the person, and I know what I need to buy the player at. I want to give the other people less time to think, right? And the way to do that is you just bid fast. You know the number, 4, 5, 7. Let them not think. If they have a number in mind, they'll do it anyways. I don't want them to think, oh, you know what? I really do need that player. I really don't. Is there somebody else I want later? I don't know. I don't want them thinking. I want them making a snap decision right away. So I'll try not to give them that, and I'll try to go quicker. Plus, it also makes the auction go quicker to bid quicker. So you can drag it out, but that's my take on that. And the last question I have is $2 bids. A lot of times you want to start off a player at 2, especially later on with some low-level catchers. Do you think that $2 bids are good? Because the strategy, of course, is you start out 2. Well, if somebody was going to bid, if you bid 1, well, maybe they'll go to 2, but I'm not paying $3 for that player, right? Do you see that working a lot? Does that work for you, Steve?
Absolutely. I try, and when I get to the end game, have an average of, if I have 3 slots to fill, to have $6 to be able to do that, because it gives you the opportunity. Number one, if somebody throws somebody out for $1 that you like, you can jump on top of that and go for 2. And throwing that out there. I think psychologically, yes, in the end game where every dollar is precious, if you're able to go two and open the nomination at that, it gives you a tremendous psychological advantage and probably eliminates half the room from challenging you.
Definitely. So definitely a good idea. That's why having the $2 hammer at the end works. I gotta tell you, last year in Tout Wars, wish I had that extra dollar because in Tout Wars, Shohei Ohtani is two different people. It's a pitcher and a hitter. And in the draft software that we were in, there was no split. It was just one player. And you had to make up some phony baloney guy who, was not going to play. We threw out Bartolo Colon. There, hoping I'd sneak that one in for $1, but somebody had the $2, and I almost got $1. Shohei Ohtani, the pitcher, and it was a points league, so pitchers mattered more. So that $2 is very helpful.
Now, I agree with everything you said, except when people try to do the $2 bid or a $3 bid earlier on, they try to quote unquote sneak a guy through earlier on. Like, let's say they want to get a $2 catcher, or they want to try to go after a $2 closer, a $3 closer earlier. I haven't really seen that work that much, and it's probably safer to hold off on those $2 or $3 freeze bids for, let's say, a prospective closer or a catcher until later on, because when people have more money, they'd be more willing to spend that extra dollar to get that player.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question, actually, about sneaking players through. Do you ever do that, Steve? You take a very low-level player that you want and just try to sneak them through $1 or $2 somewhere in the middle of an auction. I tend not to do that. Do you do that?
I've never been successful in doing
Right.
that. There always
Exactly.
somebody comes in and bids me up on it, and I get too scared and I back off.
Yeah, I agree. Doesn't work for me. All right, well, we've covered quite a lot of stuff, and hopefully we've given you, the listener, a lot of good tips and tricks and strategy on how to do it. Did we miss anything, guys? Anything else to add about auctions, bidding, strategy, values, nominations, jokes, anything?
More jokes. Otherwise, I think we've done a great job of hitting all the highlights.
And I'm sure we'll hear about it. And I'm sure we'll hear about it if we missed anything also. So don't worry about that.
Yeah, no, we tried to answer a lot of that questions that came in on the mailbag, and hopefully we did that. No, this was a really, really good show, and you might want to play it twice to get all the strategy, more than once. Just it also helps us with the listens if you just play it twice, download it, give it to somebody else in your family, tell them to download it on their phones, just beef up the numbers for us. That helps. So you do that.
Well, the goal is to help people do better in their auction. So if you need
yes.
to download it and listen to it twice, then that's perfectly fine. Just do it that way also. But the main thing is to try to get better and to learn how to do it, because auctions, they're more common in I think there's more common in football and stuff like and other sports, but baseball auctions, this is I think I love the auctions much more than doing the snake draft. I think it's more pure. I think it's being the quote unquote GM, because you can build your team the way it is, and this is what we did when we grew up, and this is what we love, and we want to try to help you and try to better you as a fantasy player.
All right. Anyways, thank you, Steve. This was a fantastic episode. Really, just absolutely great, and you were the perfect person to bring on the show. So thank you so much for coming on.
I appreciate the invite. Loved every minute of it, and I learned about the Swiss cheese nomination. So, folks out there, don't say we didn't give you something really, really new.
There you go. All right. Anything going on with you? You got labor drafts coming up. What else are you working on?
Absolutely. That's taken up the bulk of my time now. The mixed labor draft comes on Tuesday the 21st. So that's really, really soon. And then the labor auctions on Friday, March 3rd is the NL. March 4th, Saturday, is the AL. And March 5th, Sunday, is the mixed labor auctions at the Baseball HQ First Pitch Florida Conference. So can't wait for those.
Amazing. Same here. Ruvain, how about you? What's going on with you?
You can follow me on Twitter at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out injury updates as they come. There was no injury update on this episode because it was all strategy. However, please keep track of the World Baseball Classic. You will learn about injuries that you may not have heard about, meaning like Nestor Cortez having a hamstring strain or something like that. These things will come up, and watch for injuries during the course of the World Baseball Classic as well. I also have a weekly article in season on Rotoballer discussing all the injuries and the next player up.
And I'm Ariel Cohen. You can find my work over at Fangraphs, over at Rotoballer. ATC projections are up. There was not an update this week. There's a lull of news, right, from when we refine projections until spring training opens up. So not much, very minor stuff, but you'll see it updated probably a week from now over the President's Day weekend, and more frequent as we go on into the spring training season. So look for that. And, of course, follow me on Twitter at ATCNY. And you can listen to our podcast here, the Beat the Shift podcast, each and every week. You know the station because you're listening to it now. And that's pretty much it. All right. Once again, thank you so much to Steve Gardner for joining the show. And from all of us here at Beat the Shift, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.